A commander of an elite Ukrainian drone unit has announced that Ukraine is mere months away from fully autonomous killer drones. Just how did we end up here? And is this really going to be a huge leap forward in warfare? I'm Paul, US Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is one of those file this under man-made horrors beyond comprehension file for your week. This is coming from the commander of MHGR's Birds, one of the elite Ukrainian drone units and one of the earliest pioneers of drone warfare. And he is predicting that in a couple months, AI-enabled drones won't need human pilots. He says in as little as 6 months, you'll have drones that are operator free, right? These AI-enabled drones being tested, he said, by hundreds of companies. And this is part, of course, of the drone arms race between Ukraine and Russia. But what exactly is he talking about? Well, this is from Robert Brovdi, the founder and commander of MHGR's Birds, a special drone unit, talking with The Economist earlier this month. And he said that he's working, or really a huge number of defense tech startups in Ukraine are developing pilotless drones. And this is one of those things that, let's talk about why it's necessary, and then we're going to talk about why it's scary, right? He described first the systems that soldiers will only need to launch the aircraft. From there, the drone will decide on its own where to go and how to hit the target. He said the weapons will totally be able to tell friend from foe. And while obviously Ukraine's not going to out exactly what system it's talking about, this has been something that both Ukraine and Russia have been working tirelessly on, right? So why? Why do they want these drones so bad? Well, there's two main reasons. The first is because Ukraine especially is short-handed, right? It's a smaller country with a lower population than Russia. And because of the nature of this war, while they've been more successful at recruitment as a percentage of their population, they still just have an overall lower population. Russia, which is many times larger, can recruit up to 30,000 new soldiers a month, which means that for Ukraine to just keep the number of troops they're fighting stable, they need to kill or wound over 1,000 troops a day. And they've actually been doing that. But the other side of the coin is that they can't lose 200 troops a day. So what they have to rely on is every possible tool to enable them to have each soldier do more. And the thing that Ukraine has going for it is that it has powerful backers in the West who are making sure that they have munitions, making sure that they have the funding. They just can't send their own soldiers. So they have everything but people. And so when you have everything but people, you find ways to make your people more efficient. And drones are a key way to do that because, again, normally, if you were to have actual anti-tank kill teams, they would have to go forward deployed. They'd have to literally meet those attacking tanks where they're driving. And that is going to have a pretty high attrition rate. In contrast, if you have the same 3 soldiers and you train them as a drone team, right? That drone team can hit tank after tank. Even if one drone attack fails, you haven't lost a soldier. They literally just fly another drone at the tank, all right? So this kind of process really enables each soldier to do more. But it's not enough. Russia's still outmanning Ukraine, and so they need to further expand this ability. And if you could get the drones where a drone operator just has to set it and forget it, right? They simply send the drone into the air, tell it to seek out a Russian tank, and let it run, they can go back to setting out another drone. So instead of having one drone operator to one drone in flight, you could have one drone operator to 6, 12, 30 drones in flight because they're operating autonomously. Now, there's some real risks to this, but here's the thing in war. There's risks to to not doing this, right? If you cannot blunt these attacks, if you have to have one drone for one operator, one at a time, it means that more Russian attacks are going to reach Ukrainian lines, and then it's going to be on the actual soldiers in the trenches to fight that attack off. It's a much more dangerous, a much more higher casualty turn of events. So while you may sit there and say, oh, there's risks, Ukrainians will say, well, there's greater risks to not doing this. The other reason that Ukraine wants to see these drones happen so bad is jammers, right? Drone jammers are a huge problem for both sides, right? And these jammers work pretty simply. Instead of disabling the drone system itself, right? Nothing is turning off something in the drone. The jammers will work to actually sever the connection between the drone and the pilot. And when that's transmitted over radio frequency, it's pretty easy. A frequency jammer will simply block that signal's ability to reach its user. And the result is, of course, that the drone simply falls out of the air because it's not receiving any signals. There's some workarounds. As the Russians are trying out, they're trying to use fiber optic drones. These are drones that are commanded by a wire. You can literally see it. This is effectively a spool of very fine fishing line, except it's fiber optics, that's feeding commands to the drone, which means there's no frequency to jam because they're being sent over wire. Now, this has its own host of issues, including range and the fact that it can't really bypass obstacles that well. But it still is a higher percentage of success than if you had a conventionally jammable drone. But the solution with AI drones is that they also can't be jammed because there is no operator. They don't need to receive operator signal. The drone itself does the thinking. Now, this is, again, sort of fraught for reasons that we're going to talk about. But the reality is that these solutions have to be found because right now, about 75% of drones on the battlefield are bricked by jammers, right? They're very, very effective tools. And while the Ukrainians are experimenting with things like frequency hopping and other technologies to mitigate the effects of jammers, they're still highly, highly effective. They're so effective, in fact, that my partners, Ukraine Aid Ops, which is a U.S. licensed 501c3 charity that raises non-lethal aid for Ukrainian units, including a lot of drones, they are doing a bulk buy of jammers, right? In fact, these are multi-frequency drone jammers in places, and they're getting them to the units who have been requesting them frantically, including near Pokrovsk, Toretsk, and Kharkiv, right? In fact, two of the members of a Ukrainian band who have been raising a lot of funds with Ukraine Aid Ops are now in the National Guard, and their unit's going to get some. So these drone jammers are absolutely essential. In fact, we actually checked out video on an earlier video, this channel, of this jammer in action, showing how it just bricks some of these standard FPV drones. In fact, we actually had one of the units report that I can't play this video, but one of the units literally was filming a thank you. Say a video where they say, hey, thanks for this delivery of this cool drone jammer, when they got attacked by Russian drones, that they stopped using the jammer. So if you want to contribute, right, there's a bunch of sick swag that they'll give you for donating, right? $200 will get you the Unmanned Systems Forces patch, more Clear Skies pin, even a cool hand-painted artillery shell with a Ukrainian soldier flying a drone. Cool stuff. The link is in the description. Definitely support these guys. Okay, so let's talk about the other part. Why is this so troubling? This is troubling for a couple of reasons. Is that there is just for the same reason that your AI sort of sucks, right? You go to ChatGPT, right? And you'll say things like, how many R's in strawberry, right? This is a classic one. So you've got here, right? You ask it, how many R's are in strawberry? And it goes, there's 2 R's in strawberry. So these hallucinations that GPT so often does are actually pretty problematic, right? And this is a funny, silly error, but what if you asked it things like, how can you identify a Ukrainian tank from a Russian tank, right? And we could literally ask GPT this, right? How might one identify a Ukrainian tank from a Russian one on the battlefield, right? And when you ask it, you see that it itself doesn't have any really good input, right? You can see that, listen, Ukrainian uses Soviet-era tanks, but then it says the Russians do too. They say, actually, the Russian tanks might be less modified. This is incorrect, as we've seen the Russian turtle tanks look much more modified, right? Ukrainian tanks sometimes have more modern camouflage patterns, older, simpler camouflage patterns. Ukrainian tanks may have the flag or the trident. Russian tanks may carry a flag or a red star. I have never seen a tank with a red star, right? They recognize that the Z, V, or O symbols, reactive armor, but this is very, very, very subjective stuff, and it's an easy mistake to make. Every one of those conditions that it describes, that it uses to tell if a tank is Russian, is likely going to also apply to at least some Ukrainian tanks. Now, I don't think they're going to literally ask GPT to do it like that, but the reason I'm saying this is because I wanted to illustrate the fact that there's going to be an error rate, and these systems, the other thing that happens is the Russians are going to solve the systems. Here's the classic AI example, is that, the U.S. military said, listen, we think we've devised an AI that can detect if a soldier is approaching this camera. The camera was supposed to be a sentry, like at a base. And the camera was always looking for individuals approaching it. So it was trained on a data set of individuals walking towards the base, crawling towards the base, doing other things to sneak towards the base. And they said, Marines, this is actually one of my favorite Marine stories. Then they said, Marines, we want Marines to test it. Marines, I want you to try to beat this AI camera. And Marines would walk up to the base and the AI spotted them. And then Marines would try to low crawl to the base and the AI spotted them. And then one Marine said, I'm going to cartwheel towards the base. And the cartwheel was not in the database. And so this cartwheeling Marine walked up to the camera, and the camera said, I don't detect anyone walking towards the base. I don't detect anyone crawling towards the base, right? Another Marine came up with a stupid disguise. He literally like held a trash bag up over himself, right? So that it said, well, I see something approaching the base, but it doesn't meet any of the parameters for a human. So it must not be a human, right? These things can be easily thwarted by AI. And the danger is that these AI systems, that they have total autonomy, may not only be able to be thwarted very easily, much more easily than a human, but that they may be able to be tricked into targeting something else. Again, we see this kind of thing when you talk about optimization, right? You may sometimes these optimizing, like take out every tank on this battlefield. If it can't find any tanks and the nearest tank is actually back where it came from, it may go after those tanks depending on how you can kind of mess with it. It's just so hard because human beings have this really complex ability to synthesize a bunch of information, and AI, it just doesn't, and it doesn't understand the ability to make trade-offs quite in the same way, right? So while some of these drones may have a lot of promise, the fear is that they might be cheap and kind of effective, but you're going to get what you pay for, right? And remember, these are going to have the AI on board. It can't be transmitted. So it's going to be a very unsophisticated AI that's going to try to detect these. Again, you're going to buy basically a drone, a shitty GPU, and some munitions, and you're going to kick it out into the battlefield. So imagine the worst LLM you've ever dealt with. Imagine trying to get that to distinguish a Ukrainian tank from a Russian tank. It's going to be really, really fraught. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. In fact, this is almost certain to happen because the potential payoff is so great. But man, again, does a drone know the difference between a surrendering enemy an active one, right? And you might say, well, neither does a bullet, right? A bullet doesn't know if it's being shot at a friend or a foe. An artillery shell doesn't know if it's hitting a Russian tank or a Ukrainian tank. Friendly fire is a part of the battlefield life, and it's true. And again, the number one fear is that the ability of AI to get it wrong and its ability to compound that wrongness. Again, imagine a scenario where it says, hey, find an enemy combatant. This is one of the fears of Israel, for example, using AI to target Hamas. The fear, let's say it's right, it's a wrong 25% of the time, but the Israelis go, hey, yeah, good to go. Target, kill, right? Hit this target. And so then 25% of the time it says, yes, that civilian was correctly identified as a Hamas operative. It's reinforcing the data set, saying, okay, Hamas operatives can be shorter, female in stature, carrying small other humans. Like that's a Hamas operative. You don't know what this AI is learning. It's learning things that you and I may not understand. It's learning trends and correlations independent of humans that may or may not have bearing on the world. It's worrying, but there is literally nothing we can do about it because, again, the payoff for Ukraine to have an unjammable drone that can be deployed with 10 times the effectiveness, 10 of them can be used by one drone operator. The payoff's too great. It's going to happen. And we should worry about what the future of an AI-enabled weapon system looks like. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Man-made horrors beyond comprehension. It's like the theme. Huge thank you to James Jerling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knutson, Bastian Himmerling, Brian Kelly, James McCombs, James Ola, Henry Roussier, Lieutenant Tier members, all the folks at combatvetnews.com. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.